Good evening, Tony. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Good. Well, thank you for the interview. I saw you a couple of times in person. One of the time is at the White River uh, Library. That you came to our group and you share your experience, your ideas about, especially on the legislation front. So I think I'd like to start with your experience with IPS. I think that's what basically get people, you actually expose what was going on there.
Yeah, I mean, Indianapolis Public Schools was a really weird scenario because I enjoyed my work in the administrative side. I got to direct science curriculum and instruction for the entire school, for all of the buildings, all of the teachers, all of the staff. And to that degree, when I was able to do my job, I said it was one of the best jobs that I've ever had. I got to shape how the district viewed and taught and assessed curriculum, and our numbers started to go up. Our teachers were starting to get better quality materials, but I was very rarely able to do my job because we were completely stuck in this swamp of racial equity in all kinds of different stereotypical trainings and this other bureaucratic slime that has ground any kind of achievement in the district to a halt.
Right.
And that was tough enough to go through every day and to be a part of. But it was more that I was asked to buy in to the racist philosophies that the school espoused, and then to lie about it to parents if they asked us about it. That was too many for me.
Wow. Is that just directly from the principal or the headmaster?
So the superintendent, Alicia Johnson, and then her upper board staff, Dr. Morgan and his other directors told us at the district level curriculum and instruction staff what to do. And then we would inform all of the principals how they were to carry out those roles. And then all of the teachers under us as well would carry out any directives that the district required, whether on an academic level, on a social level, or in the case of IPS, on a racial level.
Wow. And so your job is trying to help to improve their science education, right?
It was. That's what I was hired to do. Indianapolis had a reputation for some time of being a really poor choice in the STEM field.
Right.
There were a lot of issues, from ancient equipment to bad curriculum to all of the different schools in the district kind of doing things differently, and many of them with very, very mediocre methodology. And my job was to step in and start fixing it. And I attempted to. The district just wouldn't really let me do very much.
Well, how did they inject race into science education? Normally we think science is kind of, independent from politics, right?
Well, I wish, although science has been very political in the education sphere for a couple of decades. I remember back during the creationism and evolution debates that science really cemented itself in the Second American Education Revolution as being a very firmly political topic. That said, how race is injected into science education in these days is in both the pedagogical framework and also in the curriculum itself. So first of all, in how you address science to the students, by saying that there aren't enough of a particular racial group or there aren't enough of a particular gender in this certain science class. And so whether it's in racial quotas through making sure there are enough of a certain color of students in your STEM program, or whether that's like what we were taught at Lawrence North before I was over at IPS, that we were supposed to measure our Black students passing or failing to determine which of us was the most racist in our science classes.
Oh, wow.
From the curriculum perspective, we can get into topics like environmental racism, or ideas that Black people don't have enough access to clean water, and that's some kind of systemic racial problem, even though it appears that has more to do with generational location and poverty, rather than the fact that a Black family will get slapped into a neighborhood with poor water. So kind of like modern ecological framework standards. That's more of how science gets science education and instruction gets put in a more racial light. And it's getting weirder all the time. There's also the history of science and saying that, well, the history of science is too white. So if you look at the guys who discovered the molecule,
Right. Mm-hmm.
and then the different iterations of what we believed an atom looked like over time, they say that's way too white. And so we have to go to other cultures and create these harebrained stories of how, well, actually this one tribe in the Great Plains in Native America thought that all of life was made of little tiny grains of corn. And so that's worth telling students. No, that's not. It's racial quoting your science history because you're terrified that we don't follow the linear flow of, or you're terrified of following the linear flow of one Western European civilized, scientist making a claim off of the previous linear scientist, just as has occurred in Chinese civilization and Indian civilization, right, which are, two of the other, and Arab civilization, which is the right, three most externally prominent civilizations. They all follow what each other do because it's a cultural mainstay.
Yeah, and like you said, like if you look at the history of science, basically each civilization borrows from other civilizations. It's just trying to build on top what they learned from other civilizations, right?
And it's really true. And there's a very weird idea in a lot of modern hyper-progressive science instruction where if another culture borrows something or builds off of another culture's discoveries, then it's considering adding something new to the mix. But when Western Europeans used some of these science, theories and whatnot, they were called stolen. Oh. So when the Japanese took Dutch studies and created a lot of interesting, micro scientific discoveries during the period where Japan was only open to the Dutch through one trading port, it was considered a beautiful addition of the Japanese and the Dutch to science. But when the United States has pulled from all over the world to create little advancements here and there, it's considered cultural appropriation. So it's really just, petty whining. And I'm not even going to give it the honor of some masterful evil scheme. It's literally just a petulant child throwing a fit because they're too pathetic to reckon with reality.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Well, you said that you are encouraged to actually lie to the parents. In what way that parents are being lied to or mislead?
Well, I mean, there are two kinds of lies. There's the active and the passive. So the active lie is very obvious. We were told if a parent contacts you and asks if you're teaching critical race theory, you tell them no. That's an active lie because we are teaching both the curriculum and the pedagogy or praxis of critical race theory. And I've talked about this at length. I'm not going to, go into it again. You're more than welcome to look that up.
Definitely.
I've provided it in a ton of places.
Yeah.
But on a secondary nature, the passive lie that district is like IPS tells their students and their parents by proxy is that what they're doing is a moral good. It's an imperative. It's a quality thing that they are doing in segregating and stereotyping their students based on color. Wow. That if they are an Asian-based student or they are an African-based student, I didn't say Black student. I mean, their families are immigrants from Africa, or their family are immigrants from Hispania, then therefore they must act a certain way because they have cultural roots. But we take it a step further at IPS and say that, if you are Black at all, you have dark skin, therefore you must act this one way. If you're white or you appear white, phenotypically, they might say, then therefore you must also have these certain characteristics. And that's the passive lie, because what we tell people is that we're really just being culturally inclusive, that we're providing safe spaces for students. When we say we're providing safe spaces for students of color, we're segregating into colored only or white only rooms. When we tell our students that we're being culturally responsive, we're stereotyping students based on their color. So it is a passive lie to sugarcoat mud and then hand it to someone and tell them to eat it.
Wow. Well, and you said the segregation. So in what way the students are segregated? Are they like just Black kids in one class and Hispanic kid in one class or white kids in
No, that would be far too easy to reckon against the Title VI Act of this,
Okay.
or the Title VI section of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Although, like Chris Stewart, who was a former member of Education Reform Movement, he did advocate while he was in Milwaukee for a separate district for Black Minneapolis public school students when he was in the school board in Minneapolis. However, in Indianapolis, that hasn't occurred. And again, that Civil Rights Act is still a little too fresh for people to get away with that. Okay. So what they do instead is they provide social affinity groups for students to meet in. They provide special clubs that only certain students are allowed to participate in. Oh, wow. They segregate values in students, and they'll castigate students for expressing what they consider are white values. Wow. That are called aspects of white supremacy culture. And this is found in the Grodner's anti-racism workbook back from 2001. Or they'll, exemplify ideas of what have been considered Southern Black and inner city cultures that have been considered objectively negative for a human to take part in, but they'll say as a part of Black culture. So therefore, improper grammar and making an effort to kind of lasciviate around the community is a very valuable thing for a Black individual. Well, it's not, and it has nothing to do with being Black, right. But they'll say that it is so that you can't call it out as a negative behavior. And we've seen this all the way back since 1990s. This was something that was a problem at that point in time. And Gloria Ladson Billings, in an effort to combat the issue of fatherlessness that was brought on by the American sexual revolution in the 1960s, stated that it wasn't the fact that children were growing up in fatherless homes. No, it had to be systemic racism.
Oh, wow. So do they in some way have a different standard based on the race?
Oh, there's no in some way. They do have a different standard based on what race. Yeah, they expect Black students to act one way, Hispanic students to act another way, and white students to act another way. And that's if you're lucky. In some schools, like at Anderson University in the higher education setting, they grouped students into students of color and then white students. So the students that are colored will act one way, and then the students who are white will act the other way. It's just incredible nonsense, and it's so detrimental to children.
So this is actually really racist thing to do, right? You separate
yes, it is.
Race. Wow, but it was disguised, as a anti-racism or
well, they have good intentions, and that's kind of the issue, is that a lot of people, and there was an Anderson University administrator who contacted me, was very, very upset at me. And well, I had good intentions, and we're just doing the work of the Lord, trying so hard to give Black students a voice away, aside from white aggressors and all of this other nonsense that she'd been taught. And what struck me were some of the arguments that came out of the Jim Crow era, that separating Black people and white people in a restaurant, it was just for the Black people's good. Right. They had good intentions, and they may have had good intentions, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It doesn't matter. And Peter Kirsanow stated this in a letter to Anderson University, considering that segregation, and has been referenced by the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism towards Indianapolis racial affinity groups recently, actually within the last couple of weeks. And that is, it doesn't matter what your intentions are. Segregation is illegal. Right. It's wrong. It is against the law. I don't care if you thought it was a good idea. Right. I don't care if you twisted numbers around to make it sound like that people preferred it. I don't care. Racism is wrong. Segregation is wrong. And that's the way it is.
Right. I mean, we look at the results, right? I mean, the results, that's what counts. It doesn't matter what's your intention. Sometimes good intentions, like I said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I have seen that over and over. There's people trying to help other people, but did it in the wrong way. It's not even helping, but you are, in a way, you do not lift them up.
And I think that in this is one of the core issues, and I would say pitfalls that we fall into rather quickly when discussing these issues. We often will forsake the more likely options of arrogance, of selfishness, and of apathy for malice, because it's easier to make an argument that someone is malicious and they've done an evil thing than to say someone may have done something for not a terrible reason, or certainly not as bad a reason as malice, but still did something that is objectively wrong. And that is because it's easier for us to have a discussion that we automatically have something evil to stand against. Like the second you call someone a Nazi, the second you call someone a communist, well, at least when you used to call someone a communist, that used to be the end of the argument. That was the ultimate bad that you could be, and the conversation was over.
Yeah.
It's much more work to discern what exactly it is that the person was doing that was wrong, why it was wrong, and then to illustrate a clear path forward that doesn't involve the horrific actions presented.
Right. And that also kind of created the difficulty for parents to do something, because I think most teachers, they truly believe they are doing the right thing.
And a lot of teachers aren't even doing a lot of this nonsense, at least not to the degree that many are doing so. Some teachers are really simple. So you don't have a lot of people think that schools are filled up with two kinds of individuals: those who are doing evil and those who are doing good. And it is not the case like that at all. If you have 100 teachers in the building, it is much more likely that 10 teachers are doing the horrific nonsense, saying the exceptionally racist stuff, doing a lot of sexual misconduct work and as regard to trans issues and non-binary nonsense. And then you're going to have 10 who are really vocally against it, if that many. And then you're going to have 80 who have sympathies with one of the two groups or with no group in particular.
Right.
And so the issues that we're facing right now are discerning, at least on the inside, teachers are discerning where they stand. And so far, it seems that the left is acting absolutely insane and are pushing far many teachers over to the right or the apolitical moderate rather than wooing them over to the left, because they just can't not act crazy. Excuse the double negative, but I cannot see them refraining from acting insane in any way. I've yet to be surprised on this.
Right, definitely. I mean, they are, in a way, they kind of double down on trying to push down CRT after they've been like called out for that. And so when did you decide to expose it, to expose what is going on? Because as an employee, that put your career in danger.
I've been working kind of on the side in education policy journalism for a while. It's not really something that I decided to do one day. I've always been pretty open about what it is that I believe. I've been in and out of education policy work for the last 5-6 years. I have been studying critical race theory at the graduate level for about 8 years. There are a lot of different factors at play when it comes to discerning what time. I guess I decided to kind of throw the gauntlet down and put my career on the line. I never really thought that I was putting my career on the line. I never really came to the conclusion that I was going to throw it all away to do something big. I knew that we would be taken care of and that everything would be fine. We trusted in the Lord's providence in that way. More specifically, I think I was just frustrated. The straws for me were what I said earlier, the asking me to lie. And then later on October the 18th of 2021, Gloria Ladson-Billings was the keynote for a racial equity presentation. And it was a workshop that everyone had to participate in all day. And everyone was openly mocking parents that, we were teaching critical race theory and they were too stupid to understand it. Wow. And that stayed with me. That was simply, it was a bit too much, and not too much as in, okay, we finally have to do something. I was just upset. I was aggravated. I was mad. And I wasn't going to sit there silently while someone dragged my name through the mud and made me an accessory to the evil that they were practicing.
Wow. So what you did after that?
Well, I created a small video just outlining, yes, that critical race theory is indeed taught in public schools, gave the examples of it from Indianapolis, outlined specifically from the text, from the scholars, where it was. and closed it off by telling parents that when we tell you we're not teaching critical race theory, we're lying. We are lying to you. You need to keep looking, keep digging. Don't be dissuaded. Don't accept our kind, condescending brush off, which we're so good at in education.
Mm-hmm.
And I edited it together and I uploaded it and I went to work.
Mm-hmm.
And on the way there, the video started to blow up.
Wow.
I ended up taking a half a day because of just kind of everything was starting to explode. Ended up going on Tucker Carlson that night, on other programs, radio and TV in the next couple of days. And the insanity grew and grew and grew some more. And it was chaotic in a lot of ways. But as to what I did next, I waited for Indianapolis to make a move, and they put me on leave with pay.
Okay.
I asked to come get some stuff from my office, and they warned everyone that I was coming into the office. And it was because I'd given them all clinical anxiety. HR berated and bullied me for a couple of weeks and threw a phony sham investigation together over the next couple of months, which they wouldn't even permit my lawyer to attend meetings with me, despite Indiana law and precedent. So there were a lot of weird things that happened, but I would more like to focus on what it is that we chose to do next, which is really put all of our weight and work into the Chalkboard review,
right,
and to Choice Media, which Chalkboard Review is an education publication that gives a voice to all teachers and parents, regardless of political opinion, because we believe that our audience is capable of deciding whether an education article is good or bad, not our editors. Ed Week, Chalkbeat, they turn down articles based on political reasons. They're not exactly quiet about this. You often see most of the articles on both of those publications leaning very, very, very far to the left. We don't do that. We have a left-wing piece or two here and there every couple of weeks. We have right-wing pieces. We have centrist pieces, moderate pieces from political perspectives in other countries. And we continue to do this because, first of all, parents love it. Parents love getting an untarnished view into what's going on in education. And then also a lot of our teachers enjoy getting to read what is going on in other classrooms, what does work, what doesn't work, private thoughts they've had that now they're able to verify or, indeed render them a successful or useless endeavor based on what other individuals are saying, from their data and experiences. The second reason that we threw our weight behind Chalkboard Review is because no one else was doing the work. There are no other independent education publications. Someone has to break some of the news that we've broken. Someone has to put their foot into the arena and say, I'm going to stand for free speech in education. And that's what we're doing.
Wow, wonderful. Well, thank you. I have read many articles in the Chalkboard Review, and very informative, and really thank you for doing that.
Thank you. We've got a lot of wonderful contributors. We're very blessed to have them.
Right. And then, so you're put on paid leave. And when the IPS decided to, did you resign, or
No, I'll never forget this. This was so funny. So my boss, who was the science and math director, they stapled her together. She never taught a science class, but she's now the director of math and science over me, who was the science coordinator, and then the math team as well. And she was sitting in the HR meeting alongside one guy and then one girl, I think, was on a Zoom call at the moment. And she cocks her head to the side and goes, "Do you even want to work here anymore?" And I don't know what they were expecting me to say, but the answer was yes. As I've said before, I want to do my job. That's all I want to do. If you let me do my job, things will be fine. If you let me do the textbook adoption like you hired me to do, reading some 60 textbooks, many of which I have purchased on my own later because some of them were really good. In fact, I have one of my favorites right here that I ended up going back and purchasing on my own from Glencoe. Really great earth science textbook. It's one of the best ones. I read it at IPS, ordered it online. It's great. If they let me do my job, I would put all of that effort in, keep going, no problem at all. But they wouldn't let me do that. They wanted me to shift the textbook focus to racial equity. They, in fact, appointed a racial equity team to oversee all of my work because they didn't trust me on racial equity, which is, quite racist in and of itself.
Right.
But the humor of the whole situation was that they were never going to let me come back to work.
Okay.
There was no way they were ever going to come to a point, because so many of the staff said that it was either them or me. They were going to walk, or principals, like Corey Franklin over at Arsenal Tech High School, which it's laughable that he would ever restrict anyone from coming into his school with the amount of violence that goes on the inside of it. And of course, with the lackluster nature of the majority of his science staff, he did say that I was banned from ever going inside his school, which again, it's the superintendent who makes those decisions, not he. But regardless of, the absolute joke that is, Corey Franklin, it was weird to be in a position where HR couldn't really fire me at the moment, because the political upheaval right after I just went national would have been enormous. There would have been, lawsuits considered and filed, even if I hadn't.
Right.
And so what they chose to do was try to wait out the storm and follow me around to events. And they sent their people after me when I went to the State House to testify, and watch me in the back of the room, and scoured the district to find teachers who would speak out against me and see if I wasn't doing my job incorrectly, or if I was doing my job incorrectly. And they couldn't find any.
Okay.
They found one sub who said that I didn't buy him a 3D printer. That's the only complaint in the entire district that they got on me, period.
Wow.
All of my evaluations were rated highly effective. That's the highest rank you can get in a teacher or administrative position. And so they were kind of in a pickle. So what they decided to do after several months, and I didn't mind being paid on leave. It was, it was nice. But they finally decided to pin on me that I had taken a day off that was not on my calendar. Although I did have 7 unused days that magically, zipped down to 0 somehow. Interesting how that happened.
Wow.
And then they said, well, and also you sort of misquoted the director of racial equity, Patricia Payne, on a radio show. And my response was, no, I didn't. She did say this, and I have the recording, and I played the recording. And they said, well, that's not what she said. I'm like, no, I could listen to the audio. She says specifically exactly what I indicated. And they wouldn't accept it. They threw a fit. And then they told me to, put the phone and the recording away, because they didn't want to hear the recording. And they finally, at the top of the letter, they said, we are firing you because we can. Indiana law states we can fire you for whatever reason we want, so we're firing you. That was it. That was the letter. And then they listed like 7 or 8 minor, and when I mean minor offenses, I mean stealing a box of paper clips would have been a much bigger ordeal than some of these offenses. Like once I forgot to attend a Zoom meeting. I have like 38 Zoom meetings a day on my calendar, and you miss them anyway every day. Because you have, IPS has dozens of buildings with multiple science teachers. And that's not even counting the elementary schools. Wow. And I'm supposed to observe all of them, coach all of them, teach all of them, all of these science teachers how to teach. And so one of the infractions was that I missed a Zoom meeting.
Oh. Yeah.
They got rid of me as quickly as possible. And I preferred that they did so, because it proves that they're cowards, and, they have no institutional backbone. And Superintendent Johnson didn't want me around there any longer, especially considering what she's done to the academic standards of the district, of which there were very few to begin with.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Do you know what's the current average I-Learn pass rate in IPS?
What year?
Last year. 2020.
No, I haven't followed it since 2018. Okay.
How about 2018? Yeah.
2018, the I-Learn pass rate in Indianapolis Public Schools, depending on the grade level, was below 30%.
Okay.
That's 30% that are below in some buildings. And the reason I don't provide an aggregate for the district is because there are many different schools and many different buildings that have different rates. There's one particular school who had an 8% I-Learn pass rate. And then there are other schools that are like centers for inquiry and instruction that are run by more independent principals who don't believe in as much of the hyper-progressive nonsense. whose students have an I-Learn pass rate of 48 to 50%.
Okay.
It depends. I stopped following after 2018, 2019 because of the chaos of COVID.
Yeah.
And those numbers aren't even released yet for all schools in all ways. There's some interesting stuff going on at the Department of Education. I can't speak to it at the moment.
Right. Wow. Okay, so you left IPS and now you are basically focused on Chalkboard review, right?
Yes, I was also appointed the director of Choice Media, which is a decade-old education nonprofit newswire.
Oh, wonderful.
That we are bringing up alongside Chalkboard review so that we can bring our commentary, op-eds, articles, reports, and then staple those next to the education newswire from around the country that Choice Media provides. So theoretically, it should be a one-stop shop for education content.
That is wonderful. That's great. Yeah. And based on your experience, why did this happen? I mean, why did the superintendents and the administrators, principals, they all push down this this agenda, the worldview, I mean, the CRT worldview?
I would attribute this again to the good intentions of believing that we all recognize there are a series of issues that people face. There are some people that are poorer than others. There are some people who have behavioral issues. There are some people that grow up in fatherless homes. And you have to ask yourself, what causes these things? Are these inherent characteristics? Is there a greater systemic boogeyman that's going after certain people? Is there this general cultural idea in the back of your mind that's automatically manifesting itself in intergenerational poverty? Or is it the individual choices of people that will be passed on to their children?
Right.
Is it, the man who leaves the woman that he got pregnant to raise his child while he goes around acting like, a fool? That plays much more of a role in intergenerational poverty, whether you are black, white, brown, or green, than the color of an individual. In fact, a child who was born black in the United States does not have any similarities with another child who was born black in the United States by any rote factor other than the fact that they have a similar skin tone. Until you start bringing in cultural factors that every other person shares. Decisions, cultural values that have been passed on, the situations regarding birth, medical things that were in the life of the parent. Those kinds of issues are going to have much more of an impact than the amount of melanin in your skin. It seems like a very superstitious way to deal with social issues. And I think that it's easier. It's easier to believe in systemic racism than it is to confront the failures of the sexual revolution, because then individuals have to be responsible and accountable. And we're just not at a place where we want that in our society.
Yeah. Well, I have been kind of involved some at the south side, Indianapolis. There are many communities which are about half that are white. But they are all in those kind of inner city situations. You talk about generational or intergenerational poverties. They are in that case. So it has really nothing to do with the skin color. And so I always kind of wonder why people are actually accepting critical race theory, because if you think about it, it really doesn't make sense. It does not reflect reality at all. I mean, right now, as you know, critical race theory basically has taken over our higher education.
Oh, there's no basically. I mean, it's been a prominent theory for quite some time. Of course, coming out of the writings of Derek Bell and Pablo Freire. I think the reason that so many people are swayed by this is because it sounds moral. It gives them a place to put a lot of rage at decisions that they have made, or I should say, move a lot of rage from the decisions that they have made and the decisions their parents have made. on to, others. So I grew up in a single parent household, and there was a day that I had to come to grips with the fact that my parents made decisions that affected me positively and affected me negatively.
Right. Yeah.
And my dad's parents and my mom's parents made decisions that affected them positively and negatively. But ultimately, what happens to me is my choice. People do not want that kind of individual responsibility. Also, I think people don't believe in people don't like to admit that there's no perfect system. So a lot of people on the left believe in this idea that man-made humanitarian utopia is within grasp. And if we just follow this series of racial approaches, sexual approaches, whatever, and we just eliminate all kind of traditionalist morality and institute this weird woke religion, then utopia will follow and everyone will be this perfect, inclusive understanding, just will be wonderful.
Yeah.
The problem is there's no system on earth that has ever worked that out.
Right.
In human history, no one has ever achieved this in any way, any shape, or any form. The best that we've gotten so far is meritocracy.
Right.
Freedom-based, laissez-faire economic system with personal liberties kept intact. And though there will be a few that fail in that system, though there will be some that by no fault of their own or by less fault of their own will be at a disadvantage and may not be able to succeed on their own. That is still the system that produced the most success, which is why there's such an importance in our aspect of our culture in Judeo-Christian philosophy, which says that those individuals who cannot themselves pull up to success, you are to fill that gap and hold that slack. That's one of the reasons why in the Christian faith specifically, you're supposed to pay such close attention to the down and out members in your church family. The Bible specifically mentions, fatherless sons and widows. Those are individuals who suffer greatly in society, at least, from biblical standards. Those are who we're supposed to take care of. That's a moral impetus that should be carried forth, not societally mandated do-goodedness that takes no effort and redistributes success. That doesn't work even in theory at the end of the day.
Right, exactly. Like traditionally, we want to help people, either in a poor family or maybe in an inner city, but we do not lower the standard, right? Because you want to keep the standard so people can move up. But what's happening now in Americans K-12 schools, especially because this CRT ideology, they basically just lower standard for the poor people, or maybe because skin color, which really doesn't help them at all.
Whenever you lower standards, you are telling the individual that is participating in the standards-based system that they are not good enough to achieve a high standard.
Right.
If I tell a Black child that they are incapable of achieving the same behavior as a white student, I am insulting the Black child and also being vehemently racist, because I am saying that their color affects their moral character.
Right.
And furthermore, I'm also calling them stupid. You're too stupid to behave as good as the white, the white child is. To quote our president, you have your rich kids and your Black kids, as he's said before, and a couple of gaffes.
Okay.
I think that moving forward, this is why I'm such a big fan of classical education. It takes a look at the soul of each individual, regardless of origin.
Right.
Because tracking race is so silly. There's only one society in the 20th century that really cared about how many of your grandparents were of a certain race, and we destroyed them in World War II.
Right.
I don't think that we should be concerned with the color of our skin. That's why color blindness was such a wonderful thing. And by the way, that's where classical education was pointing to.
Right.
There are no great Western canon pieces that celebrate being white. There are no great Western canon pieces that celebrate being a man.
Right.
In fact, the only great Western canon pieces that address manhood either address it as something that must be completely and routinely disciplined and upkept with great moral and personal sacrifice, or saying that left unchained, you get the absolute chaos and horror of the animalistic nature of human group in
Right.
Lord of the Flies.
Right.
And so when we take a look at the provision of classical education towards students from various backgrounds, we need to take a look at what it's teaching those students on a moral and character level. And affirmation is not a moral virtue. It's codifying, it's a band-aid, and it doesn't provide anything of eternal or even temporal value.
Exactly. And but what is going on, which is in especially public schools, is the opposite, right? Especially the so-called equitable grading, which basically is like what you said, it basically telling the Black kids that they are not capable of reaching the same standard as the white kid or maybe as the Asian kids.
When I look at the equitable grading problem in many public schools and universities, all the way from admission to graduation, I am hit once again with the concept of standards, and that telling a student that because of where they come from or because of the color of their skin, they're incapable of attaining an amount of academic achievement is horrible. I am sickened that the country has turned a blind eye to the racial quotas in universities, specifically at Harvard, where we have been trying to pump up the numbers of Black students at the university and yet restricting the number of Asian, Jewish, and white students at the university, because by and large, the average score, which the idea of an average racial score is bewildering enough, as it is, we're restricting the poor kid from Appalachia who worked his butt off to get to Harvard.
Right.
But, the rich Black student from the Northeast, gets in because of a racial quota. That's horrific. It's insulting to the Black student. It's demeaning to the white student.
Right.
And it's a stain on America's institutions.
Yes. Yeah. Well, talk about systemic racism. That basically is a good example of systemic racism in the higher education.
Yeah, that would be an example of a system that by nature and by policy is written to encourage racial segregation. You see the same thing in STEM programs, by the way, modern STEM programs saying that we need more Black kids in STEM. That's systemic racism.
Wow.
You are saying that you need to racially segregate your process of admission into an education system program. That's systemic racism. Wow. That will perpetuate long-lasting effects on the Black community.
Yeah,
meritocracy will not negatively impact the Black community as a whole, because capitalism and basic meritocratic gain don't see color. They see personal improvement and cash.
Exactly. But that's actually what how do you say that? The woke activists, if you look at the critical race theory, and that's what the theory basically is against what called meritocracy, right? Because that is considered whiteness.
I get so fed up with the constant use of the term whiteness. Not because I am offended at the idea that someone is called white. I don't think that being white means anything at all.
Right.
There is no such thing as white culture.
Yep.
There isn't, because if you go to first of all, there are separate parts of the United States where people of the same color and similar heritages have nothing to do with one another. If you break that down even a little further, there are parts of Indiana that I would go to where I would not fit into the culture at all. At all. Right. Southern Indiana near Louisville and northern Indiana up near Goshen and Fort Wayne and deep Amish country. I don't fit in there.
Exactly.
Not to talk about if I, go into northern Ohio near Toledo, or I go up into Wisconsin, and that's just in the Midwest. Try putting I had a wonderful experience once, and this wasn't between two white individuals, this was between two Black individuals. I was in an airport in Atlanta, and there was a young Black man from New England who I had been chatting with, and I was going to Popeyes to grab some dinner. He went to grab some with me. He was standing in front of me in line, and the line stretched a long way out from the register. It was very busy at that time. And so the cashiers were coming out to take individuals' orders, writing them on bags. Then you would hand that bag to the cashier.
Okay.
So this young black lady working at Popeyes comes up to this young black gentleman in this nice blue suit, just flew in from the Northeast, very Harvard-esque kind of accent. And she starts giving him this rapid fire, in the city, Atlanta question on the order. He can't understand her at all. I have to step in and translate from one individual to the other. And that was such a reminder to me. Well, not a reminder to me like I needed a refresher. I already knew this. It was definitely a situation where, once again, clearly exemplified that your culture and where you grow up has more to do with an aspect of your character and who you are rather than your skin color. So when someone says whiteness, I mean, despite the fact that there are like 86 different cultures that would consider themselves under the category of white. I mean, besides also all of the mixed individuals and those who come from, several different linear homes and light-skinned people. I mean, when someone uses the term whiteness and meritocracy and what things benefit each other, it's word salad heaped upon word salad, meaningless ideas crafted from an individual so pathetic, angry, and toddler-esque that they're simply using as much passion and anger as they can feasibly piece together in order to make an argument.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And as you said before, I mean, well, just kind of through a rough number, about 10%, those are those woke activists, but they have a lot of energy and power, especially they have the support from the administrations.
From the mathematicians, you say?
No, administrations.
Administrations.
Gotcha.
I do think that administrators hold the majority of the blame in these situations, because they set the tone, they set the professional developments, they set the standards. And there is a trend of your more progressive members of education going to administration. The majority of graduate program students that I saw at Ball State University for both of my master's degrees were very, 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 very woke, very progressive. And then they would go on to set the standard for, their entire school systems. And that is definitely where they get their encouragement from.
Wow. And I know personally that a lot of teachers were afraid to speak out.
Yeah, I received some interesting criticism from some of my Indiana trolls that love following me and despising me with every fiber of their being. And I'm very grateful they continue to bring new eyes over to the work that we're doing. They don't realize how many of their former friends they're losing over to us. It's quite wonderful. But in some of their complaints, they like to suggest that because there haven't been a huge bevy of Indiana teachers from IPS that have come out in support of the work that we're doing, that they must, we must be making it all up. But I've actually encouraged the teachers that I've worked with and that continue to give me information on the inside of what's happening there and in many schools across Indiana and the country. Stay quiet, stay where you are. Do not out yourself. I was fired for nothing. They will fire you. And I had, the connections to escape to a different job and to continue my work. And also I was at the time already prepared with a lawyer. I was prepared with a great work so far in education policy journalism. So I was able to cover it correctly. What I tell teachers is it's more effective for you to leak information to parents and to leak information to, organizations like us who are going to respect your identity and keep it secret. And you continue to draw a paycheck. And weather the storm until we're able to pass legislation so you can go start your own school where you can be your own boss and you can survive and you can enjoy the joy of teaching without all of the hyper woke nonsense that administrations carry with them and the other crazy blue-haired teachers alongside you.
And also I think in a way that is the right thing to do, for the teachers to expose what actually going on inside the classroom.
I think it helps. I encourage more teachers at all the time to share things that are going on in the district. This horrible idea that we need to protect the innocent stupidity of coworkers who are making detrimental decisions to children is something I've never quite understood. who would sell you out in a heartbeat,
Right.
who would, rat you out to HR and sell you to the Stasi for a 2-cent piece.
Yeah.
I'm not, it was never in my interest to wreck coworkers. And a lot of my coworkers and private conversations that we've had, I've never released to the media. Some of them are pretty horrific, but I will definitely make sure that when they make official statements that I criticize those, because I don't agree with the statement.
Right.
And on a professional level, you need to come to terms with the question, are you more concerned with what is happening to the students? If your identity was secure,
right,
and you knew you weren't going to get, called out, or you weren't going to be hunted down,
right,
are you comfortable with what's going on enough in the school to keep the naive, young, blue-haired social justice warrior from receiving criticism? Because if you're more concerned about their fragile criticism, you really should leave education, because you care more about the feelings of the student than the results. You care more about the child crying they have to eat vegetables for dinner, rather than the horrible effects of someone eating brownies for every meal for the rest of their life. Again, affirmation is not a virtue.
Right, exactly. Because that's where you send your kids to, is to get the education, right? Is to have teachers who tell them something they did wrong, they have to make the correction, right? Not just baby them. I mean, that's the parents' kind of job, is to baby their kids, but they wanted their teachers to be, to inspire them, and also to have a standard, that a high standard for the students to reach to, right? That's basically what education is supposed to be.
I think so. And I think that we're moving towards a time and place where I think we're moving closer to being in a time and place where the rote value and the genuine value, which are two very different things, the objective and the subjective, maybe would be a better explanation, values of education are made manifest by people looking at results, and people who are looking at the 100-year history now, almost to the day, according to E.D. Hirsch Jr., this 100-year history of progressive educational nonsense has yielded nothing of value. And I do mean nothing of value compared to its traditionalist counterparts.
Right.
I believe that it was the aspects of traditional education that brought us to the moon. John Deweyan social circles and nonsense did not get us to the moon. Rote mathematics and physics got us to the moon.
Right.
That's what's developing great things today.
Yeah.
It's just not mainstream. As it starts to become more popular, we should start to see things turn around.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what I'm hopeful in the past 2 years is to see a lot of parents get involved, and many parents actually take their kids and homeschool them. So that, which is a really hopeful sign for this country. And we are lucky enough, and in America, that we can do that, because you cannot do that in other countries. I mean, like China, you have to give your kids to the government.
There's a very weird concept of in loco parentis that's come forward in education, and it's stirred around in many different ways. I'm not going to try to address it. The idea that any individual who doesn't have children of their own can step in and take children from someone else is not a new idea in human culture. It's something that's been done for a very long time. I've heard some people try to attribute to controlling the next generation. I've heard some people saying that it's a sad, lonely tactic. I've heard some people say that there's a repressed sexual nature to it. Some individuals are just very hungry for affirmation, again, as it is affirmation from the student to the teacher. I think it's a blend of all of those depending on the individual. I don't think that either reason is the core of any one, whereas, there can be situations where several of those play in. I think that when you disagree with someone so fundamentally that you despise their being, you want to take from them, and turning children against their parents is just a means to an end in that way.
Yeah, this I think is a very dangerous. Well, like you say, it's not new, but it's very dangerous, is that a teacher thinks that they can, turn the student into something that against the will of the parents, and they think that's the right thing to do. They think that's kind of moral.
Well, there's a moral justification. There's a religious argument to it, and there's such this blind faith to the idea that they believe there is a genuine moral evil. And we saw this, and I was criticized for making these comparisons, and I don't apologize because they are accurate. That in Nazi Germany, in East Germany, in Maoist China, throughout the 20th century, there were state initiatives to turn students against their parents for the reason that they believed that a moral good rested in the virtues of the state and what was being done. And it was the traditionalist ideas of their parents that was holding back from progress.
Right.
And what came out of it was a massacre. What came out of it were horrible atrocities via state security.
Right.
And that's what we are starting to see now. And in many cases, children that are setting themselves up for years of mental and sexual abuse, children that are sterilizing themselves or being allowed to sterilize themselves, not to mention doing incredible damage to their endocrine systems through a lot of the gender related nonsense. It's really quite insane.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking with you. I have learned a lot from you. I hope that we can continue our conversation. I mean, definitely, I will continue to read the articles that in Chalkboard Review. Thank you for your courage, actually, to take a stand, and also for your work now. You are really doing a valuable and wonderful work to help parents.
I really appreciate the compliment. It's not courage as much as it's just I'm aggravated. I'm aggravated at the dishonesty. I'm aggravated that people can't read.
Yeah.
I'm aggravated that our kids can't read because the adults can't read.
Right.
The apathy on the sides of teachers and parents in many cases is frustrating. So we're going to keep doing what we're doing. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Okay. Bye.